iconic Chesapeake Bay species are oysters. And this is a picture of Chesapeake Bay Foundation's oyster barge, the Patricia Campbell, which actually plants oysters in the Chesapeake Bay in partnership with a lot of organizations. Oysters are one of the best filters in the bay and also create structures, or specifically in historic times, created structures out and reefs out into the bay that were really good for habitat and reducing wave action. The Chesapeake Oyster Alliance is something that the Chesapeake Bay Foundation is in partnership with on many other organizations, and a growing list of partners is focused on adding 10 billion new oysters to the bay by 2025, which we know will have so many different benefits. The key aspects of oyster restoration include restoring oysters in sanctuaries, improving fisheries management, and increasing aquaculture, which is a growing field in the region. A newer nature-based solution, or actually not new, but something that's emerging, are freshwater mussels. And that guy over there is Dr. Joe Wood, who is a scientist at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and an evangelical around freshwater mussels, which you can't really say about many people. But Joe is huge about mussels. He'll tell you that if you look at a map, very few people in the watershed have oysters and crabs in their backyard, but a lot of people have freshwater mussels. Like oysters, mussels can filter millions of gallons of water in a day, and they are found all over the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We're looking at how they can also be indicators for water quality, and there's incredible diversity of mussels, and so learning a lot more about how mussels can help us with water quality improvement. A favorite of many people, of course, are trees, which have so many different benefits. This is a picture of our work in Pennsylvania around planting 10 million trees in the Keystone State. And we know that trees not only are good for wildlife and for water quality, but they're great for people, cooling areas and creating shade, enjoyment. Our effort is really to focus on getting as many trees in the ground as possible, and the state of Pennsylvania trees are one of their big important solutions that they're using in terms of the Chesapeake Bay cleanup, and so we're excited to partner with a lot of different organizations and the state of Pennsylvania around just getting as many trees as possible in the ground. Okay, now to the topic at hand. Beavers. So as I said, when I started to talk to my team about why beavers were so important or what they had to do with the Chesapeake Bay cleanup, we talked a lot about why beavers and oysters have so much in common. They're both ecosystem engineers and are very good at what they do. Just as oysters build three-dimensional reefs and provide essential habitat and filter their home, beavers build dams, trap sediment, store groundwater, reduce nitrogen and nutrient pollution to the bay, and create important wetlands and habitat to support biodiversity. And this is where I fully acknowledge that I might have the least amount of beaver knowledge in the room, but I am going to tell you why I'm really excited about beavers and the Chesapeake Bay. We're really excited because beavers are increasing in population in the watershed, and I think, and I know that this community is really aware of what happened during colonization of this area and the loss of beavers. But we're seeing increased numbers of beavers in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and we think it's a really good thing. Second, like many other nature-based solutions, beavers do wonders for water quality. Scientists have recently, and especially probably many in this room, have recognized that beavers are an ecosystem engineer and that things like dam streams create ponds which can trap sediment and process nutrients, which is a huge source of pollution to the Chesapeake Bay. Some of the research on that is done just down the road from my office at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center in Edgewater. I think also many of you know how cost-effective beavers can be, and really creating an opportunity for us to do a lot more for upland streams. I'm also really excited about the ecosystem services that beavers provide, including all of the different habitat that beavers create that we know have incredible value, and looking at ways to address some of the conflict issues or coexistence issues with humans. And finally, something that we've been looking at a much better integration of with the Chesapeake Bay cleanup is the nexus between water quality improvement and addressing the impacts of climate change. We know that beaver ponds and meadows can fix about an incredible amount of carbon, but also that the changing climates, and this is something that was really evident out west with water recharge and looking at creating resilient habitats in Montana in particular, that beavers can really help address and improve water access and raise the water table, increasing groundwater for wildlife and for people. I think one of the other things that I love about nature-based solutions, and beavers are one of those key items, is that they can provide habitat for other species, and that there's this interplay between species, and in this case looking at the importance of beavers in creating other habitat that can help with trout and other species that are in upland areas. The dams built by beavers create an increase of different types of habitat and biodiversity. And we know that, and many of you I'm sure are thinking about the opportunity that beavers create for fish and other species. So I'm thrilled to be in the Chesapeake Bay cleanup at a time where we're looking at a lot of different ideas for improving water quality and nature-based solutions to both water quality and climate change. And I'm thrilled that beavers are now part of the wide list of solutions that we have. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much for having me this morning.
Thank you. Are beavers ever found to inhabit like the saltier portions of the bay? Because I know there's a lot of study going on about that on the west coast, whether beavers can tolerate salty conditions.
I knew I was going to get a question about beavers that I wasn't really able to answer, and so that would probably be one of the questions that I don't have a good answer to. But I think it's a great question, and I know when we were talking about beavers at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, one of the questions was, where are we finding beavers? Where are beavers not suitable? Or where should we be not attracting them? But I don't know what their tolerance is with salt water.
It seems like you've got you have an enormous challenge in cleaning up the Chesapeake, mainly because of the number of jurisdictions involved. And with beaver, as states regulate, or state law regulates wildlife, do you have any way of thinking about normalizing or getting together all of the states so that you don't have that kind of difference in using that particular tool?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one of the really great things about the Chesapeake Bay cleanup has been the Chesapeake Bay program and the science teams and number of committees that are focused on the effort to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. And because of the various states and the District of Columbia and their efforts to clean the bay together, there are a variety of efforts that are looking at all of the challenges, but also a lot of the solutions, and how best to promote solutions that work throughout the watershed. And there's a lot of collaboration across the states. And so we've seen, and one of the things that Scott and I were talking about were the ways that the Chesapeake Bay states promote different best management practices throughout the watershed, and actually even give those different solutions credit. That is a really important way that we add them to the models that look at pollution loads. And so I think the opportunity with Beavers is actually through all of the different committees and structures within the Chesapeake Bay program, because then it can be integrated in everything from science to the actual best management practices that will be part of the suite of solutions that all the different states use. But it's a great question, and something we've been thinking about as we try to look at other nature-based solutions like freshwater mussels and things that haven't really been a primary focus for the cleanup, because we want to make sure that we have the best science behind the Chesapeake Bay cleanup, and that we're looking at the best and most innovative solutions. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, sure. My daughter went to Franklin or Marshall, so I know you're very well educated. I was just curious if you're going to be able to get the cattle and horses away from the streams in this watershed. It's a big problem everywhere.
It's a big problem. Yeah, so each state has different policies and practices that focus on stream exclusion, and some of that is fencing, but a lot of it is riparian buffers and other nature-based ideas to keep cows and other animals out of streams. But that is a huge opportunity, because especially Maryland and Virginia have found a lot of pollution reductions from those activities. And so I think one of the things we've been looking at are what are all of the innovative ways to keep cows out of streams that don't just require fencing. And the great thing is that there are a lot of other ideas that can keep creative ways to keep cows out of streams. And so as we focus on the whole Chesapeake Bay cleanup, but also in particular the state of Pennsylvania and helping them catch up on their Chesapeake Bay goals, looking at ways to keep cows out of the streams in Pennsylvania in particular is a priority in every possible way. No, they don't. Pennsylvania doesn't have laws around this, and I think we are looking for, as I said, creative ways to get Pennsylvanians to help. And we have found that farm-side buffers in Pennsylvania are a great solution.
Does the type of cattle grazing have an effect on, for instance, a dairy farm has more impact than so what kind of grazing are you seeing in these areas?
Could you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
So how many cattle are being seen in these streams, and is there a influence in the type of management of these cattle?
Yeah, so there's there are a lot of different best management practices that are based on the type of farm that you have, and so there are a suite of different practices that farmers can use in order to address whether that's manure or keeping cows out of streams. And so one of the best kind of resources are the local ag technical assistance support, but we're also looking at other creative solutions and more on the nonprofit and private sector side of things to make sure that farmers know what are the most effective ways to reduce pollution coming off of farms. And since one of the largest inputs to the Chesapeake Bay from a pollution perspective is from farmland, the other thing we're really focused on is regenerative agriculture and different rotational grazing and other ideas that where filtering of those pollutants is happening on the farm, and so we're seeing clean water coming off of those farms. And there's a lot of excitement and energy within the community and across the watershed around those practices and the potential that they have, and sort of less need for farmers to put other inputs on the farm in fertilizers because of the fact that they have really healthy practices on their farms.
Okay, as a quick follow-up to that, with that regenerative ag and the bison biomimicry, a lot of the people in this room are using beaver biomimicry to manage waters. But could you comment on the regenerative ag and the rotational grazing actually building your soil, making your soil a better sponge so that we're slowing, spreading, sinking, soaking, and storing water into the landscape before it makes it to the creek, so our creeks are cleaner and better able to be colonized by beaver?
Great question. And my new caveat is that I've been on the job for 5 months, so I'm still getting a handle on a number of things. But I have gotten out to several regenerative farms in my short time back in the watershed, and looking at the quality of soil on farms that are focused on regenerative agriculture is just incredible. And to see what that soil looks like and the potential for it to store carbon, and as you said, had all these additional benefits, and the also opportunity of keeping soil on the land, which in the Chesapeake Bay is a huge issue. But I think the soil quality has so many benefits, and I was just talking to some of the farmers about how that soil is also increasing quality of life for the farmers, because they don't have as many issues with herd health. It's less expensive. Those farms are more productive, and also in one farmer I was meeting with, he was about to hand that farm down to his son, and the value of that farm and what the potential of it in the future had everything to do with the quality of that soil. And I think there is so much to soil health that it's a huge part of the future of agriculture, and we know a lot of other certain ecosystem services.
So, Hilary, I know that a lot of your work has been in generating networks and forming partnerships to realize the ecological solutions that we need. And at the Bay Foundation, there have been a lot of networks built from farmer to farmer and between farmers and watermen. And so I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for people in the room about spreading the word about the good things that beavers can do around the country in these really diverse areas where everyone's working. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that.
Thanks so much for that question, Claire. And when earlier in my career, I helped build a coalition to protect the Chesapeake Bay, and everybody thought that the conferences and the meetings that we were having were about content. What about like how we were going to do something? And they were really about the dinner the night before, possibly a beer in the lobby, They were about forging personal relationships and trust across organizations, across states, across communities. And I think that is absolutely what is before all of you. And that the relationships that you build here, the ones that you build across the country to support beavers as an incredible ecological strategy, will be what takes this entire effort to the next level. And so I think Scott was mentioning maybe some of the extracurricular activities that you have planned, and I suggest that that's the way that this changes, and that the continued relationships and dialogue between all of you will be what makes the difference, because that is exactly what I found in my years of coalition building all across the Chesapeake Bay. Thanks for that question. I'm a big fan of coalition building, if you didn't recognize.
Hilary, you mentioned that beavers are increasing their population in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about, the metrics that you measure that by, and what you see as future challenges for that trend to continue?
Yeah, thanks so much. I don't have all the numbers on the increase in population, but we do know that they are increasing just through various studies that have been done. My experience out west is that we now need to do a whole lot of education about beavers and about the benefits of beavers, and get ahead of some of the conflict issues with landowners who aren't quite sure they want a beaver dam on their property, or are concerned about their trees. And so I think there is a massive educational need right now to share the benefits of beavers, how to attract them to your property, why that's great for your own property, and I think that that's what is important to come next, because otherwise I think we will see a lot of conflict issues and a lack of understanding about the potential of coexistence with beavers. And I know that is one of the things that you'll be talking about the next couple days.
One more question for you, Hilary.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a student from Idaho, and I got here last night, and so I'm really excited to be here. But I just wanted to ask about how a conservation organization can facilitate better legislative action, and how you actually go about creating long-term effects for conservation.
Great question. And there may be a lot more people in the room who can answer that question. I think for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, it's being present in communities and states where we're acknowledging the challenges that are present within conservation, building relationships with other organizations that have different strengths in terms of policy or advocacy. For instance, in the state of Maryland, there's an incredibly sophisticated group of organizations that meet and build consensus around the needs. So in Maryland this year, the big focus was on climate solutions legislation. And by making it the priority of every conservation organization based in Maryland, that bill passed. And I think sort of additionally building relationships with champions in the legislature. I think Maryland is rich with legislators that care deeply about the environment, but there are a couple folks that continue to carry the water for conservation issues and legislation. A couple good legislators that are great at batting down the bills that are a problem, and just sticking with it, because I think we've seen with several pieces of big legislation that they won't pass that first year. But if you continue to improve the bill, improve your advocacy, improve your relationships with legislators, that year over year you'll see the results of a lot of effort. And good luck to you in Idaho. That sounds great. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I have kind of a question and a comment. I wondered if you have had any traction with the Department of Agriculture. In the Farm Bill, there was a provision that allowed the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, which is the National Research Center, to trade land with the Treasury building, with the Treasury Department, and they're building the new printing plant, which is a toxic, operation next to the, well, for one, on the back Beltsville Agricultural Center, and also next to the reference stream for Prince George's County. So, yeah, that was in the Farm Bill.
So I'm not familiar with that, but that's, again, not a huge surprise because there's still a lot that I'm learning, but that sounds like a problem. So I'm happy to hear more about it after I hop down. Well, thank you all for letting me spend breakfast and your coffee with you. I wish you the very best on this week and in the future, and I look forward to continuing the conversation around beavers and the Chesapeake Bay. So enjoy your conference, and thank you so much for having me this morning.